right, so we got Jason Moore here from Elite HRV. I'd love to ask you a bunch of questions on, how you got started and what motivated you to get into this space and, what your athletes are finding.
Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to be here. I appreciate you reaching out. And it looks like we've had some cross-pollination between our audiences already. So
yeah, I'd love to tell everyone that's following, what we're doing, that they all need to be getting what you have.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for being here.
So when did you get started? What's the backstory?
Yeah, so Elite HRV was founded about 3 years ago. We're in 2017, right? And it kind of started as a side project because I was a health and fitness coach for several years before that. And I have a background in IT, information system design. To not go too far into the weeds on that, my job was to build complex data analysis and tracking systems. I say build lightly. I was more of like a designer and user and experience designer. But anyways, did that in the oil industry, was doing the health and fitness thing, really saw a lot of good success with myself and with my clients and started networking, getting into the ancestral health scene quite a bit there. And so I developed this platform for myself and for my clients and then put it out there. Lots of people started downloading it, using it. We iterated a lot over the last couple of years. And
exactly how does it work? What kind of hardware and software combination is needed?
Yep. So heart rate variability looks at the tiny changes between each of your heartbeats. So you need a really accurate heart rate monitor, which fortunately now a polar type strap, like a consumer heart rate monitor, like a Polar H7, is accurate enough to capture those beats and we're talking about accurate to the millisecond, right?
So you need to be on the chest. You can't have the wrist ones aren't accurate enough, right?
Right now, the best and most available options are chest straps. There's a lot of companies trying to look at alternative sources or solutions to that. But the ones that are available right now on the market are either kind of closed door black box solutions. So you're not really sure, what's going on underneath the surface there, or they're super expensive or like adhesive based that are typically not what people want to do either. So.
Neat. Yep. So did you develop the 1 to 10 scale system to determine, how to define someone being in a 3 versus an 8, or is that already pre-existing?
Well, that's something that we've kind of adapted. So we definitely weren't the first HRV app to ever come out. But we kind of saw a need to take it to the next level, so to speak, and also started including other data like exercise data, sleep data, and other things like that kind of make correlating and determining what to do with your HRV values a little bit easier. And then one of the things that we came out with was our relative balance gauge on the Elite HRV app, which I forgot to mention. That's the other half. Once you get the Polar strap, for example, you have to pair it with an app, which ours
I kind of assumed that, but yeah.
Yeah, ours is Elite HRV. So it'll transmit the heart rate data to our app where we run our calculations. Our HRV calculations are at the core. We base ours around RMSSD, which is like a research standard for capturing short-term changes in parasympathetic activation, specifically in autonomic balance over time. So
in a little bit more layman speak, it just basically you're able to determine whether someone is in full recovery mode based on patterns in their heart rate. So the slightest fluctuation in heart rate will tell you, hey, you might need to hold off on another hard workout, or hey, you're fresh today. I mean, that's like the layman's explanation, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's a whole, we teach a whole, there's like a 4 hours worth of video content that we teach on people on how to measure and interpret HRV values, but we try to build that all into our app and make it really understandable for people to say, like
screenshots, the 1 to 10 gauge, which is great. I see them all over the place. You must have made that one click easy to share.
Yes.
Can you explain what a 1 is, what a 3 is, what a 5 is, and what a 9 is, and how often people are at the extremes?
Yeah, sure. So basically what our app does is it looks at your individual patterns over time. So it's important to kind of take a step back and say, if you just measure HRV once in, like one time 5-minute reading, for example, it really can give you a basic idea of where you stand ballpark wise compared to like other people, but it actually has a high potential to be skewed and not be very useful.
Yeah, it's
So
custom to the person. That's awesome.
yeah, exactly. So if you think about it like this, like if you measured one time and right before it you were working out, most likely you're going to get a much lower reading than if you were just napping right
Right.
before it, right? So what we do is we encourage people to take a reading each morning, because that time of day is particularly repeatable. And then once you do it on several days, the app starts building an individual pattern of what your heart rate variability values typically look like, and as a result, what your nervous system patterns typically are. And then it helps you understand when you've deviated from your norm, which that's where that 1 to 10 kind of
Right.
readiness comes in. So typically, if your heart rate variability all of a sudden spikes up and is elevated outside of your normal kind of standard deviation from your norm, then we're picking up that there's elevated parasympathetic activity, and that you're either accumulating kind of, there's a number of reasons that could happen,
Right.
which I'll come back to. On the other end of the spectrum, if your heart rate variability goes down, and I want to take this opportunity real quick to say HRV up, HRV down, it sounds like, up is good, down is bad. And it also is a little bit counterintuitive. When I say HRV is going up, we mean your heart is more variable. So
Right.
there's more fluctuation and change in your heart. And that's actually generally a good thing at rest. But anyways,
So is the best number, sorry, is the best number 5 or is the best number 9, 10 on your scale?
so that
Or
depends specifically on your goals, but in general, a 10 is the best for
recovery?
long.
If the goal is recovery,
Yeah,
one might say that 9, oh, I'm too recovered. I've wasted a workout day. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about recovery. So it'd be 9 and 10, not 5.
correct. Yeah. So yeah, basically the way our scale works is HRV can go up and down, right? If it goes too far up or too far down, that's both bad
Right.
for long-term results, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. You don't want to
And
be too
so,
rested.
yeah, our gauge kind of guides you, not exactly between parasympathetic and sympathetic, but slightly leaning towards that parasympathetic side. So what our assumption is in general is that the average person will want to either maintain or increase their heart rate variability over time, right?
Right.
So our perfect 10 is actually slightly above your average balance
Right.
between parasympathetic and
So you're
sympathetic.
allowing individuals to be their own N of 1 scientists. I mean, that's just, I mean, people would spend huge amount of money to go to a scientist, and you're just giving it to them, to play around and tinker with different, what if I cut out a mile? What if I go a little bit faster? And, everyone can find the perfect balance and then just hone in and stick with that. It's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, one of the things that in my experience, and I think there's a lot of supporting evidence for this now, is that it's good to find frameworks and principles that generally guide your decision making. But then when you come down to the actual nitty gritty of what's best for me at any given situation, it's highly variable and highly individual. And that's the same whether you're talking about training, nutrition, sleep,
Right. Well,
psychology, all
obviously
these things.
there's dozens of variables. So I don't know, are certain people focusing on food? Did I eat 3 eggs instead of 1 egg? Am I vegan, not vegan? Are you seeing people playing with food? And then the next question is specifically supplements and seeing patterns in, pre-workout drink, post-workout drink, and testing those as variables as well?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, like I'm sure you're aware, we have a lot of athletes on the platform. We have the full spectrum of people, though, from people managing chronic disease all the way up to Olympic athletes, pro athletes, national sports teams, stuff like that. And yeah, you can definitely bet that there are a lot of people interested in food and nutritional supplementation as well, but across that whole range.
Right.
So you know.
Do you aggregate all this data and have, there's a website called Patients Like Me. I'm not sure if you've seen it, where people can check a box saying, I've tried vitamin C, I've tried this, I've tried that. And then they kind of pull it all together. Do you have a system where someone tries, checks off the different products, and then you can kind of have a top 20 things that affected HRV?
That's a great question. And that's actually the exact kind of way that we're evolving this year specifically.
Okay.
As I mentioned kind of at the beginning, we're interested in allowing people to track a lot of data alongside of HRV, because people kind of get excited about specific things like HRV. There's a lot of excitement around it right now. And people think, oh, I just need to measure HRV and then that's it. Like, I'm going to be awesome after that.
Right.
And it's like, well, okay, you're gaining a bit more self-awareness, which is very important. And
right.
But just measuring HRV in a vacuum and nothing else, it doesn't really tell.
It's about changing the variables also and finding out, figuring out the marginal gains that I like to quote, and see what works perfectly. That extra half hour of sleep, waking up earlier, waking up later, eating late. I mean, it's endless. And it would be awesome if there's a way, and I don't know how, to put all this data, checkbox questionnaires, and those who go to sleep before 9 have 1 point higher HRV scores. I mean, everyone would flock to that, and there'd be like a best practices, how to improve your score. So that's a really exciting space. So what got me initially interested in it was Dustin Armstrong, a professional cyclist, was using our drink, a ketone monoester, and he found some amazing results. I think he started the day at 3 or 4, started the hard workout with the drink, and then the next day woke up and he was like a 7. He thought that the meter might have been broken. And we actually got that again from Greg Henderson, 5-time Tour de France person. He started the day and he was actually already wrecked from a hard work week, from a workout week, and wasn't going to add an extra hard workout. But since we were able to get it to him on time, he said, I'll just do it, even though he started at a 3. And the next morning he woke up at a 7. So I don't know if that would be the equivalent of taking the day off. But he just woke up fresh after a grueling hard workout. So what kind of, have you seen random variables like that happen, or is it, pretty rare to see a jump, pre-hard workout and then the next morning being, more fresh?
Yeah, it's definitely like one of those things that's not common. I mean, what you'll typically see after a competition, and any competitive athlete would kind of understand this, is that competition day is unlike any other single day of training, right? So, hopefully your whole volume of training has prepared you for the competition, but that one specific day is greater than any other stimulus from any single training day. So typically what you'll see is a huge drop in HRV on the day following a competition.
I think he actually did a game day. I think Dustin did a game day as well. And the next morning he was fresh. So imagine, I imagine having that drink on a 5-day tour, every morning waking up fresh would be, pretty crazy.
Yeah, that is. And so there's some stuff you have to play with there too. I mean, the term fresh is definitely subjective. What we'll see with heart rate variability is it kind of gives you a picture of your systemic nervous system condition. Okay. But there are things like, localized fatigue, like muscle soreness and joint fatigue and things like that, depending on all of the factors, especially in highly trained athletes who are used to exerting their muscles and joints and tissues really extremely, they could still have
almost blown out sore, and but your heart rate is pumping at a certain rate, so you're checking that. So you
could still have some localized fatigue and stuff like that. But what I would say is really interesting about that, though, is that there's always this balance, whether it's a long competition or post-competition or even post just training, there's this balance of performance and recovery that you're aiming to elicit, right? So you want to get high levels of performance, which includes activation of the sympathetic branch of your nervous system, and that typically makes HRV go down. So you don't necessarily want HRV through the roof in the middle of performance, right?
Yeah.
But you do want it to rebound quickly after performance if you're aiming to activate those recovery systems quickly and sustain a high level of recovery. So there's debates on as far as like the optimal time to have inflammation increase to experience the best long-term muscle development and things like that. But in general, if you're trying to recover quickly and steadily, you want to activate that parasympathetic branch as soon as you can after a competition. And so the phenomenon that you're talking about with Dustin, I'm familiar with both Dustin and Greg. Greg's very active on Twitter, and Dustin's asked many questions, and he's a very inquisitive person. So we've interacted several times. Yeah. And yeah, that example specifically, we'll use Dustin as an example of his HRV coming back up after competition day would generally indicate that his recovery systems are coming back online quickly, and he should be over the long term, able to mitigate a lot of the damage that happens from competition day, for example.
Right. So how would you, if we were to do some scientific studies to prove performance gain and include Elite HRV in that equation, any suggestions on how we would, organize that study for best, predictability of, what the product does?
Yeah, sure. So, the best way to do it would be if you had time and a large enough sample of people, is to have them do competitions where they're measuring HRV daily up to during the competition and after the competition.
They do it during. They measure the HRV during? Okay, I missed that.
Well, I apologize. I mean the day of.
Okay.
So the morning of.
So just like what Dustin was doing and what Greg was doing. So there's no, trick beyond just morning, 8 a.m., keep the same time, and okay.
Yep, same time, same body position. So don't do it like standing one day, laying down the other, because that will skew the differences. And then, just have them. But I would do, because each individual's response and their individual sport will change their pattern a little bit, right? So if you're talking about comparing like a power lifter to a cyclist, that's a pretty easy to understand difference in the sense that a powerlifting competition will affect your body way different than a cycling competition will. And so also their level of training background, et cetera, et cetera. So the reason why I say if you have a good sample of people, which we have quite a budding sample over here.
How many do you have? Do you have a number that you publish?
Yeah, we're about 120,000 now.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, and we have several million HRV readings in the database, and we actually have some dedicated data science people looking at the data to see what we can actually learn from it. And actually, what you mentioned a few minutes ago about kind of running studies essentially and
recommended products. Like we see this pattern in your stuff. You need to be taking, Beefcake 2000, whatever, from that South Park show.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, a great example of that is actually, so we have a podcast and we have had a functional medicine doctor who's had great success supplementing amino acids with his clients, and he specifically has found that certain amino acids really boost heart rate variability for certain of his clients. And so we talked about that on the podcast, and it was just a very natural. People were very receptive and thankful for us to give that information out because, for example, this like exogenous ketones and ketone esters producing this type of result with Dustin. The combination of, like you said, being able to get your hands on Ketone Aid, for example, at a reasonable price, and Elite HRV, which basically just costs you a heart rate monitor, so $50 one time. You have the lab that you need to self-experiment, and then if we can capture wide enough population data on this stuff, then we'll have.
Is there any false readings that can occur? Certain amino acids, certain supplements that might make your numbers appear better, but you're really just as fatigued as you were. Like, is there any? anything like that, like caffeine that can, throw the numbers off? So it's
yes. That's a great question, and that would be those types of details would be the ones that if you were going to organize a formal research study that you were going to publish and make recommendations to other people, you'd really want to isolate lots of those variables, like does this person have arrhythmia? Are they regular caffeine consumer? Because caffeine typically does impact heart rate variability. Certain foods, I mean, food is hard to control for, but you don't really want them to like go from a high carb diet to a ketogenic diet overnight and then expect HRV to just not change, right? So if you want to
like that,
right?
It's good to know that caffeine would, might throw it off and stuff like that. That's interesting. So,
and there's also things that do very acutely impact heart rate variability, but may not necessarily impact it over the long term. And so this is another thing, especially if you're talking to high performance folks. Like the example I give them is 1 day's training, doesn't really make a difference in your competition performance if you're an elite athlete. So if you miss 1 day or train 1 day, it generally isn't going to, make or break your competition. But as with anything, if you do that on a regular basis, right? If you skip like a whole week, then definitely, or if you push it too hard for a whole week, then that definitely could impact your results. So it's important to not only look at the single day heart rate variability. It's important to see kind of generally how it's trending over time as well, if you really want to dig in.
You could also be tracking people's PRs. Like, here are the people out of your 100,000. Here are the people that got PRs last week, and this is what their last 2 weeks of data points look like. I mean, it's endless.
Oh yeah, we've got.
Graph out. This is Steve jumping in for a minute. Seeing those changes over days, do you have a method to graph out those changes to see if there are like curves that data follows a curve?
Yep, definitely. Yeah. So our team dashboard, which is our web dashboard, allows a coach to look at their athletes or clients. We have everybody from doctors to researchers to high performance coaches using that. And that dashboard focuses more on the overall trending and pulling out those patterns of the trend versus just the day-to-day. Because if you think about it, a coach or a doctor or somebody doesn't really have time to tailor every single day's worth of advice for every client usually. So what the good thing is, though, is like I was mentioning, is a single day when you're analyzing yourself and kind of tweaking your own stuff can be really powerful as far as like affecting long-term results. But really it's that weekly trend that we like to focus on there. And we actually just published a blog post by Andrew Flatt, who's one of the prominent researchers of heart rate variability and performance. And he wrote a post for us on coefficient of variation, which is one specific statistical method for analyzing HRV. And that focuses solely on the weekly trend, basically. So yeah, we've got that graphed in our dashboard, and it's in the app as well, but it's a little easier to see it on the big screen.
What kind of results were you seeing from those amino acids? What kind of after game day, before and after swings?
So the amino acids were primarily with people who are managing either chronic illness or
so it wasn't
health related. Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
But yeah, basically for them, they were seeing that they were having abnormally low heart rate variability compared to their demographic average. And this can actually occur for athletes as well. In fact, athletes are usually the ones who reach out with this question saying, hey, I'm very fit, but according to your population analysis, which includes like, I think our population demographic chart includes 72,000 people. And they're like below their age demographic for HRV values. And they're like, but I'm really fit. And so, one is, HRV is a little bit individual person to person. But two is just because you're fit doesn't mean that there aren't other areas that you could potentially be improving on.
Oh, you're overworking out. I mean, the fit person that goes to the gym 4 hours a day instead of 2, they think they're fit, but they could be more fit. I mean, there's always improvement, right?
Yes. And fit, again, is kind of, I guess, one of those subjective terms. Depends if you're thinking, are you fit in the sense that you can run really fast, or are you fit in the sense that you have low systemic inflammation and, good mobility and a good social life and blah, blah, blah. So like you said,
your machine can't detect social life, right? There's no detection for...
Oh yeah. Heart rate variability is very sensitive to psychological health. So, which we had Dan Quintana, who's one of the prominent psychological study generators for heart rate variability.
So, do anything with meditation in that front, like people who meditate and be able to get better numbers?
Yep. And so
meditation
is one of those things, like you mentioned earlier. Are there things that can affect HRV
artificially,
artificially, right? Meditation,
like exogenous ketones, artificially make your ketones go high.
Yeah, exactly. And so meditation is a good example of what a lot of people want to do is they'll measure their HRV, they'll meditate or do some specific breathing patterns to increase their HRV acutely in the moment. And, that is easy to reproduce. Anybody can go get the app right now. There's breathing patterns built into the app if you want to try it out. You will increase your HRV most likely by following.
It's not healing your body. It's not making your body, more fresh to go on that race. Now, maybe over multiple weeks, if you incorporated meditation, there might be benefit. But just because it suddenly says 7, now I can go. Now I can go in that race where otherwise I would have, not done it if I was a 3. Yeah. Be artificially bump your number.
That's exactly right. So the key with the meditation thing, for example, what we teach in our course with meditation is what you want to see is 2 things. One is, are you able to incorporate it into other activities in your life? Because, specifically we're talking about breathing more than meditation. So I understand you can't necessarily meditate and, be in a meeting at work, but breathing patterns and things, without going too far off on that, people tend to breathe very shallowly. They tend to chest breathe or shoulder breathe. And they have basically a restricted breathing pattern that doesn't let them fully express their parasympathetic branch of the nervous system and get also the proper diaphragmatic pattern that you'd look for in a rested state. Anyways, meditating and doing guided breathing can help that in the moment and also increase HRV in the moment, but it's way more powerful if you can teach yourself to do that during other activities, right? And so this would be kind of the equivalent of, maybe this is a far-reaching comparison, but it would be like if you took Ketone and then measured your blood ketones, but then 2 seconds later, it was all gone, right? And you couldn't use it during a race or something like that.
Yeah, I get it.
Then it'd be like, okay, well, maybe in this 2 seconds it's working, but later, but fortunately, something like Ketone does last through your system through the event, right? So it's not just like if somebody did kind of a couple deep breaths before a race, maybe psychologically that would improve something, but it most likely wouldn't necessarily prime their nervous system instantly for a successful race, unless they were able to take advantage of that breathing pattern during the race, for example.
So what about Spire? I've tried Spire before. It's a device that stays on you for 24 hours. Is that a competitor, or is that something that you might actually be able to incorporate their data into your system?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't see them as a competitor. I don't believe that they're measuring heart rate variability in the same way that we are. And
I know they count breaths, and it's it's a full day spectrum of how many deep breaths, how much did you rest, how much were you working out, and it kind of maps out that. And I don't know to what degree I think they check heart rate, but not necessarily, it might not be sensitive enough for HRV.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of wearable companies are seeing is that recovery is becoming huge, right? A huge topic overall. And so people are kind of coming out with different ways of calculating recovery. Some people do it just from like sleep duration and perceived sleep quality, for example.
Right.
If you know, don't sleep enough and you rate your quality bad, then you're probably not recovered. So that's a way of thinking about recovery. Another way could be related to patterns in breathing, saying like if you're, again, you might have to talk to the Spire folks on this because I'm sure they have some kind of algorithm detecting recovery and things from that. But basically what we're looking at is regardless of your situation, is your physiology expressing that you are recovering or are recovered or not, right?
Okay.
So whether for you it's breathing or for somebody else it's sleep or for somebody else it's nutrition, you know, different people need different things, and heart rate variability is kind of like a catch-all metric to say, is this working or not?
And what percentage are athletes versus non-athletes? Are you like 50-50 or 90-10?
Yeah, we started out 90-10 and now we're about 50-50.
Okay.
So definitely the high performance scene helps draw a lot of attention. But yeah, people are finding success with all sorts of conditions. Yeah.
Well, thanks for the interview. Now I can send people to one place, a slightly biased place, send them to this video and explain, because I've been telling them to do it. I can say, you know, go here. And I think we hit everything. I think we have a much better understanding. I think everyone watching will as well. And thanks for that.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you having me on. I did make one note that I had seen something that would be interesting to your crowd that you might want to look into is there's some research by, I think, Kimura and colleagues. I'm probably saying that wrong, but there's some associated research with that about short chain fatty acids and beta hydroxybutyrate specifically, both having a direct impact on the sympathetic nervous system.
Okay.
And in different phases, it can both increase and decrease sympathetic activity, which one's good for performance and the other is good for recovery. So
definitely want to see that.
It'd be an
I've not
interesting
seen
one
that, so I'll take a look at that.
Cool.
And soon enough, if we get enough product, we'll have to actually send you some and see what it does for you.
Yeah, definitely be happy to experiment with it. I mean, I've got glucometers and blood ketone measuring equipment here already. So
what are you doing? Are you doing stuff on the ketone front? Are you doing different
just cyclical experimentation. So I'm not targeting any specific event or anything like that, or have any specific goals with my ketones at this time. But
right.
I've
cyclic like 2 weeks in, 2 weeks out, or cyclic 2 months in, 2 months out.
Well, not like a regular pattern, more like when I have the opportunity to. So I eat fairly low carb, high fat. So probably on a daily basis, I wake up with a decent amount of ketone activity. But as far as targeted nutritional ketosis goes, I'm experimenting on an intermittent basis. And the last time I did it, it was for a month. And so I measured my HRV and actually ended up, I kind of documented this, I discussed it on my podcast. I had some gallbladder issues that sprung up around the same time. And without going too far into that, the gallbladder plays a key role in digestion of fat. And I was not supplementing with exogenous ketones in any way. So it was pure nutritional ketosis. But my HRV just crashed like through the floor. It was the lowest it had ever been. And I didn't feel that great on it.
Well,
but
could it be the keto flu? I mean, that would be great. I mean, if it could, had a quantifiable keto flu. My sister actually just texted me today because after she's been trying to get into the ketogenic diet, and 3 days she's been showing me her numbers. I'm like, feeling sick yet? No. And then I got this flu, like all of a sudden it just hit her. So it'd be great to also see on the scale, like doing well. You know, she must have ran out of all the glucose that was stored in her system on day 3 or 4, and then it's just like crash, and trying to get her back up. I said, get over the hump. If you can get over the hump, you know, it's smooth sailing. 80% of the people quit right here. Don't quit.
And that's another great kind of whole N=1 type opportunity, is like the keto flu, for example, as you're well aware. For some people, it like basically doesn't happen. For other people, it's a big crash. For some people, it's one day, and other people, it's a week.
One thing I love about the ketone meters and checking, you know, for people that want to do a ketogenic diet for weight loss, is instead of looking at the scale, they can have another target. They can just, you know, no scale, just be testing their ketones. And if your ketones are high, not with exogenous ketones, but regular nutrition, if they're high, you know you're burning fat. And, you know, who cares about the meter? You know, who cares about the scale? So I could see some applications where people could, you know, not look at the scale and say, hey, you know, how's my fitness level with HRV, and have a number, some goal. People like goals. They like to try to, you know, achieve, rather than just looking at the stupid scale that doesn't tell you the fat and muscle, you know, amounts. So, but thanks again. And we will definitely be in touch, and I'll let you know when this is up, and I'll, you know, tweet it on over to you.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds great. Yeah. Appreciate you guys inviting me on. Thanks, Frank. Thanks, Steve.
All right.